Something strange is happening in Jerusalem right now. Not gradually, not symbolically, but visibly. Quiet movements are taking place in the most contested city on earth, and almost no one is connecting the dots. What was once dismissed as impossible is now being prepared openly. What scholars argued over for centuries is no longer theoretical. It is operational. Stay with me until the end. And if you understand the weight of what you're hearing, like this video, leave a comment and subscribe. Because Jerusalem is never shaken without consequence. Not gradually, not symbolically, but observably. The city has not exploded into chaos, yet its atmosphere has changed. And in Jerusalem, atmosphere matters. Because Scripture never treats this city as neutral ground. It treats it as assigned ground. For centuries, Jerusalem has been the center of prayer, conflict, and prophecy. But what is happening now is different. The city is no longer waiting, it is preparing. Quietly, intentionally, and with a sense of urgency that did not exist before. This is not political noise. Jerusalem has always lived with politics. This is something deeper. Movements once confined to belief are now moving into action. What used to be discussed in theory is now being handled in reality. The Bible warned us this would happen. Zechariah 12:3 says, "On that day, I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the nations. All who lift it will surely injure themselves." Not a symbolic stone, not a spiritual metaphor. A burden that draws pressure from the entire world. That pressure is building now. Walk through Jerusalem today and you feel it immediately. Not fear, not celebration, expectation. Orthodox communities move with heightened urgency. Religious institutions operate with long-term purpose. Visitors arrive not just to observe history, but to witness alignment. Three faiths are watching the same city. Not out of curiosity, out of necessity. Jews watch Jerusalem because restoration has always been tied to this ground. Christians watch because Scripture says the final chapters return here. Muslims watch because preservation of sacred space is inseparable from identity. Three belief systems, one city, no neutral outcome. Jesus himself warned that Jerusalem would become the focal point again before the end. In Luke 21:20-21, he said, "When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near." That warning was not limited to one generation. It was a pattern marker. The mistake many make is assuming that prophetic moments announce themselves loudly. They rarely do. They begin with positioning, with preparation, with small movements that only make sense later. That is exactly what is happening now. Jerusalem is shifting from being a city people argue about to a city events move toward. And Scripture shows that once that transition begins, history follows. This is not coincidence stacking on coincidence. This is convergence. The Bible describes Jerusalem as the place God chose to place His name. In 1 Kings 9:3, God says, "My eyes and my heart will always be there." Always. Not temporarily, not historically only. That means Jerusalem never exits the story. It pauses, it waits, and then it re-enters forcefully. We are watching that re-entry now. What makes this moment dangerous is not violence. Jerusalem has known violence for thousands of years. What makes this moment dangerous is clarity. The conditions described by Scripture are no longer distant. They are forming. Preparation is visible. Alignment is measurable. Resistance is tightened, and the city is no longer dormant. Jerusalem does not move often, but when it does, the world is forced to respond. Not because it wants to, but because it has to. Something strange is happening in Jerusalem right now. And this is only the beginning. What is happening now did not appear out of nowhere. Jerusalem did not suddenly wake up to prophecy. What we are witnessing is the final movement of a sequence that has already been unfolding for centuries. Quietly, precisely, and without the need for human agreement. The first milestone was destruction. The Second Temple did not fall by accident. It fell exactly as foretold. Not approximately, not symbolically, literally. The center of worship was removed, stone by stone, and with it came a rupture that changed Jewish history forever. This was not merely a national loss. It was a prophetic reset, a line drawn between what was and what could no longer continue. From that moment, everything changed. The Jewish people were scattered, not for decades, not for generations, but for centuries, across continents, across empires, without a homeland, without sovereignty, without control of the city that defined them. History records this as exile. Scripture frames it as dispersion. Either way, it was total. And crucially, it was not reversed early. For nearly 2,000 years, nothing restored what was lost. Jerusalem remained unresolved. The land passed from power to power. Civilizations rose and collapsed. Yet the Jewish people remained without a nation. That silence was not failure. It was restraint. Because prophecy does not rush restoration until the appointed moment arrives. Then, against every historical pattern, the impossible happened. A nation returned. Not gradually over centuries, not through imperial conquest, but suddenly, in modern time, in full view of the world. After nearly 2,000 years, Israel was restored as a nation. What had been treated as ancient memory reappeared as present reality. This was not just political rebirth. It was prophetic ignition. But even then, the process was not complete. The land existed. The people returned. But Jerusalem itself, the city Scripture isolates again and again, remained outside Jewish control. Divided, restricted, held back. That mattered more than most realized, because prophecy does not center on borders alone. It centers on location. And then, without prophetic fanfare, another milestone locked into place. Jerusalem returned under Jewish control, explained by analysts as military outcome, framed by history books as strategic victory. But prophecy recognized it as something else entirely. Access restored. Conditions aligned. A city once trampled entered a new phase. This was not the end. It was the final prerequisite. Each of these events unlocked the next stage. Not randomly, not loosely, sequentially. Destruction made dispersion possible. Dispersion set the stage for restoration. Restoration made return inevitable. And return brought the city back into focus. This is where modern observers misunderstand the danger. They treat these moments as isolated historical anomalies. Prophecy treats them as completed requirements. Once fulfilled, they do not need to be repeated. They do not reset. They do not wait. They close behind us. And now, this is the part that should arrest attention. According to Scripture, nothing essential remains undone before the final phase begins. No further regathering is required. No future return is needed. No foundational condition remains unfulfilled. The groundwork is finished. What comes next is not restoration. It is activation. That is why Jerusalem feels heavier now than in previous generations. Not louder, not more chaotic, heavier. Because when all prerequisites are met, history moves differently. Pressure replaces patience. Alignment replaces delay. This is not the beginning of prophecy. This is the end of preparation. And when prophecy reaches that point, it does not slow down to warn again. It proceeds silently at first, then unmistakably. Everything required has already happened. What remains is what Scripture says comes after. And that is why what is happening now matters more than most are prepared to admit. There is one development in Jerusalem that alters the entire end-time sequence the moment it moves from theory to reality. Not because it is impressive, not because it is sacred, but because Scripture requires it. According to biblical prophecy, certain end-time events cannot occur without a functioning temple. Not a symbolic one, not a spiritual metaphor, a real operational structure. This is not interpretation, it is requirement. That is why the Third Temple is not optional. For centuries, its absence acted as a restraint. As long as there was no temple, key prophetic events remained locked. Debate continued. Timelines were argued. But prophecy itself could not advance beyond a certain point. That restraint no longer holds the same power. What makes this moment different from every generation before it is not belief in a future temple. Jews have believed that for thousands of years. What makes this moment different is preparation. Practical, measurable, irreversible preparation. For decades, work has been happening quietly, away from headlines. Not announcement, not speculation, preparation. The kind that only happens when people expect use, not theory. Sacred instruments described in Scripture have been recreated in precise detail, not as museum replicas, as functional objects, ready for service, ready for ritual, ready for use. These are not symbolic gestures. Symbols do not require accuracy. These preparations demand precision. Priests have been trained according to biblical law. Lineage verified. Instruction followed. Procedures memorized. This is not reenactment. It is readiness. And that distinction matters because prophecy does not move forward on enthusiasm. It moves forward on qualification. When Scripture lists requirements, they must be met exactly. Partial obedience does not unlock prophetic progression. For the first time in centuries, the temple is no longer blocked by lack of readiness. The only remaining barriers are political and circumstantial. And history shows those barriers are never permanent. This is where the world misunderstands the danger. Many assume the Third Temple represents spiritual restoration. Scripture presents a more complex reality. This structure begins fulfillment, but it also begins deception. The Bible is explicit that the same temple, celebrated as a sign of divine alignment, becomes the stage for the greatest deception humanity has ever faced. This is not contradiction, it is sequence. Fulfillment does not always arrive clean. The temple does not usher in the end immediately. It ushers in a period where truth and imitation coexist, where authority appears legitimate, where worship looks correct, and where deception becomes nearly indistinguishable from devotion. That is why Jesus warned repeatedly about deception in the last days. Not disorder, not chaos, deception. And deception requires credibility. A functioning temple provides that credibility. This is why Scripture treats this structure as a turning point, not a victory. Once it exists, the final phase no longer waits on missing conditions. Everything necessary is in place. That is what makes the Third Temple so dangerous. Not because of what it is, but because of what follows it. For generations, people assumed this moment would never come, that the barriers were too great, that history itself would prevent it. But prophecy does not ask history for permission. It advances when requirements are met. And now, almost every requirement surrounding the Third Temple is no longer theoretical. They are ready. The moment this structure becomes operational, the timeline shifts permanently. Debate ends, delay disappears, and the world enters a phase Scripture warned would be unmistakable, but not immediately recognized. The Third Temple does not end the story. It removes the final restraint, and once restraint is gone, prophecy does not slow down. It accelerates. There was one requirement that stopped everything. Not politics, not war, not opposition. Purification. According to Scripture, no temple service can begin without it. No priest can minister. No sacred space can function. Not spiritually, not symbolically, literally. And the Bible is unambiguous about how that purification must occur. Numbers 19 establishes the requirement with precision. Tell the Israelites to bring you a red heifer without defect or blemish, and that has never been under a yoke. Not partially red, not mostly unblemished. Perfect. This was not a ceremonial suggestion. It was a legal requirement. Without it, nothing else in the temple system could proceed. And for nearly 2,000 years, this single commandment did what no empire, no army, and no exile could do. It stalled prophecy. Generation after generation searched. Animals were examined. Candidates were disqualified. A single hair of another color was enough to invalidate the requirement. A minor imperfection erased eligibility. Time itself worked against fulfillment. Eventually, many assumed this command would never be satisfied. That assumption became convenient, because as long as purification remained impossible, activation remained impossible. Preparation could continue, discussion could expand, but the final sequence could not begin. Then something happened that should have been impossible. In 2022, unblemished red heifers arrived in Israel. Not one, not a rumor. Multiple. They were not symbolic representations. They were living animals meeting the biblical criteria. Inspected carefully, examined repeatedly, measured against the exact requirements laid out in Scripture, and they were approved. This moment did not come with global headlines. It did not interrupt markets or trigger alarms. But prophetically, it removed a restriction that had held for centuries. For the first time since the destruction of the Second Temple, the purification requirement described in Numbers 19 was no longer theoretical. It was present, viable, protected. This is where the weight of the moment becomes clear. The red heifer is not dramatic. It does not inspire crowds. It does not command attention. And that is exactly why it matters. Prophecy often hinges on details too small for the world to notice, yet too precise to ignore. Scripture makes clear why this matters. Without the ashes of a perfect red heifer, purification cannot occur. Without purification, priests cannot minister. Without ministry, the temple cannot function. And without a functioning temple, the final sequence cannot advance. This requirement was not symbolic restraint. It was procedural restraint. And now, that restraint has been removed. What followed immediately was not construction, not announcement, but shift. Preparation moved from planning to positioning, from readiness to responsibility. When the final missing condition appears, delay stops being enforced. It becomes voluntary, and Scripture shows that once humanity reaches that point, momentum replaces caution. This is why the arrival of the red heifers matters more than most people realize. It does not complete prophecy. It authorizes it to move forward. The Bible never presents this moment as celebration. It presents it as transition.